Hello and welcome to the third block. Now this section focuses on the how of research methods. So we have now done our research topic. We have a research problem, as best as you can see now. We have done some literature review and know the theories behind this topic and understand the main arguments. And we have identified a possible gap. And now the question is, how do we go about getting the answer to our central research question and our sub-research questions? And here in the circle, we find that we are in this section where we plan and we design. We then move on to how do we implement an action plan, and then we evaluate, and then we conclude. So we're in this 1, 2, 3, 4th stage. And in this stage of planning and research design, what we can see is that there are a series of things and steps and stages that we need to get through. And the first is to really understand the philosophical assumptions. And we wonder, why is this important? I mean, why is it important to consider the philosophy? Well, it really pertains to the development of knowledge and how do we know, how do we view the world. This is epistemology. But we find that at every stage we do make assumptions about human knowledge, assumptions about the nature of realities, and you will encounter this in your research. So understanding where we come from in terms of philosophical assumptions is very important. For example, there are some who take on this position of a positivist research where the world works according to fixed laws of cause and effect. So research will uncover certain truths. And are you testing a hypothesis? So this is a very scientific approach. Some have come to this understanding of realism, where they realize, hey, we cannot observe in a pure objective way. Perception influences what we see, and there is a limit to subjectivity. Right? So how we perceive things will influence how we see things. Yeah. Post-positivism posits that there is no total objectivity. So we try our best to represent reality. Basically, it says that no one can ever be totally objective. Yeah. And this is very important for our research. And another philosophical assumption is that of a subjectivist, where reality is in part constructed by us and our observations. So a subjectivist person will say, look, there are multiple realities and we can construct them according to how we observe. Now, research can also be interpretive or social constructivism, which means that human beings construct meaning as they engage in the world. And so meaning is always social, arising out of interaction in community. And so the goal is to document and interpret people's points of view. Finally, there are the pragmatists they will say, hey, let's just use methods that will really depend on the research question and you have the freedom to choose. I am very much a pragmatist in the sense that your research will be very unique in a sense, and then you will want to find the methods that you want to use that is best, that can unearth the answers that you are looking for, and no one research is the same as another's. Yeah. And so let's get this out of the way. You can figure out which one you are or which combination you are, and then we can move from there. And understanding this will help us navigate and will help us reduce chances of getting information that is biased. Okay, let's move on to the methodological choice. And in this, what kind of methods, what is the method that we are going to use to get the answers? All right, so in terms of methods, there are three main methods: qualitative research, quantitative research, and mixed method research. So what do I mean by this? Now, quantitative research has to do with numbers, and it has to do with experimental statistics. Yeah, and so it is something like you send out surveys to people, and they fill in the surveys. How many people like the food in this canteen? How many people don't like the food in this canteen? Why do they like? Why don't they like? And they tick, 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 tick. Quantitative method is like sometimes how do we do evaluations in our classes, right? We use quantitative methods, and there is statistics involved in it, and analysis is by analyzing the statistics and interpreting the statistics. So here you learn how to build up instruments and how to ask the correct questions. But it is predetermined in the sense that you already know where you're going, and then you find a way to get answers to where you are going. Now, on the right side, you find there is what we call qualitative methods, and these are more emerging methods. Sometimes it is qualitative really means that you go on the ground and you begin to talk to people. Sometimes you observe. It has to do with field research. You document the data. Sometimes you use audiovisual data. All right, and what I mean by emerging methods is that it is not fixed. There is really space that when you discover something, you can ask further questions and go on in certain directions. Yeah. So qualitative is a more creative and more flexible method to use, and it involves field research. Now, many of us will be using qualitative methods, and there is a space for what we call mixed methods, but I would say that if you really want to just go with qualitative methods, that would be the best way to go. I just wanted to show you the three different methods that we are going to use, and then I'm going to supply you a video clip by Pressville that will give you more information on mixed methods. But I would really recommend that you not use mixed methods, but you use qualitative methods in your research. Okay, now we have nailed down our methodological choice. What are the strategies that we are going to use? So, for example, under quantitative research, of course, the strategies using using questionnaires, all right, and sending out questionnaires. And now you can do it face to face with people, or you can do it online, or, different strategies. But it essentially has to do with questionnaires. You find that in qualitative research, there are different methods that we can use: case study, action research, narrative inquiry, grounded theory, ethnography. There is also archival or theoretical work we do. Now, all of us in our literature review will be using archival or theoretical strategy. So that's not something that we will not do, we will do. But in our field research, then we have these other qualitative methods. Survey would be a quantitative method, and experiment would be a quantitative strategy. Okay. And so mainly, let me just run through some of the important maybe understanding or an overview of each of these methods. And we will run through this again when we come to our intensive classes. And so this is just an overview. A case study basically is an in-depth analysis of a single or multiple cases, or 2 or 3. So generally, if, for example, you are choosing a research topic on, let's say my research topic was on transformative worship, and it was in the case of the 2 Selakau villages, right? And so it was a case study. And so case study will, in a sense, limit your research and keep it within certain parameters so that the information you get is solid and it's reliable, yeah, and is valid. And so the case study is really good in the sense that it generates answers to the question why, as well as to what and how. Action research is another strategy that enables practitioners to investigate and to evaluate their work. So this is very much used, for example, in medical research as well as in field of education. It looks at what have I been doing, what do I need to improve, how do I improve it. So for example, if you have a curriculum that you want to look at and improve on in your church, let's say a discipling curriculum, you will want to first take stock of what is going on, find out what is the curriculum, what are the philosophies behind it, find out why it is not working that well, you identify a certain concern, and then you think of a possible way forward. And then after you have done that and planned that, you take action, you implement it, you try it out, and then you evaluate it, you monitor and evaluate the progress, and then you make improvements and recommendations from your evaluation. Now, action research often goes through 2 or 3 cycles, but in the case of your DMIN project, if you're doing action research, then 1 cycle would be sufficient. Another strategy is narrative inquiry, where data is generated through the use of stories. People shape their daily lives by stories of who they are, and they interpret their past sometimes in terms of their stories. So story is a portal a person can enter into the world of the other, and then be able to evaluate and interpret their experience in the world. And so narrative inquiry is the study of experience as story. Yeah, so it's very much like journalism, but it inquires not so much what happened, but what meaning did people make of what happened. 3 other strategies are grounded theory, where you developed and construct a theory from the ground, right? And so from the ground means you look at a certain situation or a certain case study, and then you examine it, and then you begin to pull in data from theory and all that, and then you it's like a loop that you use, and you in the end generate a theory. I would not encourage us to use grounded theory, although it's a great way to generate theory, because we are just working on a DMIN project and not a PhD thesis, which requires a new theory to be developed. And so let's not use grounded theory, but I just want you to know what it is. Ethnography is another way of writing about people, describing and interpreting a cultural and social group, and that is not something that we will also use. We can use it as part of our strategy if we wish to, in terms of description of a particular group that we are interested in. But very often describing and interpreting would be insufficient in terms of primary data. Archival research is something that I think most of us will use. There are administrative records, sometimes documents, photos, secondary data that will help us or give us information in our research. All right, and so most of us will use some form of archival research. And so we have done with the strategies of research, and you can see there are different strategies that we can use, and sometimes we use a combination of 2 or 3, and that is fine. Oh, that's because I'm a pragmatist. And so now let's move on to data collection. How do we collect the data, right, that we are looking for? And there are 2 types of data. One is secondary data, that is information already collected. Sometimes we can use documentaries, photos, past surveys, or journals that will shed light on what we are, our subject of interest, right? So for example, when I was working on the Slackaw people, there was already a dissertation written on the festivals, particularly the festival of Gawai. And so I used a lot of the information there, or basically information to speak into my own observations. But I didn't stop there. I went and did my primary data investigation. And so I attended 2 Gawais. I interviewed people, asking them about the meaning of certain ritual actions or certain ritual objects. I didn't use questionnaires, but generally I did a lot of interviews with ritual specialists and with the leaders of the community. There is also another way of collecting primary data, and that is through participant observation. And basically the word participant observation means that you are taking part in the activity. You're not just observing, but you are a participant in that particular activity. And so there are various kind of ways that you can do it, in the sense that on top there's an active participation, or at the bottom you merely observe an activity. So when I was at the Gawai, I wasn't really a participant. The only participating thing I did was to eat, but I was observing. But they knew me well enough, the village people knew me well enough to accept me into the community. So I could learn a lot of things. My researcher's identity was revealed. They knew why I was there, and I think I would like all of us to go that way and not do it secretly. There are also interviews, which would be the primary way that we are going to get our information. All of us will be using interviews at some point or other. So there are different types of interviews. There are structured interviews, right? Structured means you have a series of 5 questions and that's all you're going to ask. There are semi-structured interviews where there are 5 questions, but sometimes a certain informant can have other information that interests you, and so you're free to deviate and move along with the person. There is also unstructured interview where some people move, and this is more exploratory. Yeah? So they ask one question and from there they move on to the next, and to the next, and to the next. Unstructured is very difficult, mainly because it is very hard to analyze if it is too unstructured, because it's very hard to code and categorize. Now, what are some of the criteria we will use to select a methodological choice and strategy? First, you want to know what is your intent and focus, which is why we did block 1 and 2. Then you need to know your audience. So that's very important. And you also want to ask who will be studied, what information will be collected, right? So what is the data that you are looking for? Who will be studied? What information will be collected? What is the object of research, right? So the object of my research were the Slackaw people, and Slackaw Christians in particular, and how they had used the Gawai ritual festival and adapted some of the important points and contextualized it so that they could devise or create a Christian Gawai festival that is in line with the Selakau cultural customs. There are 4 considerations for selecting people or sites to study. So the first one is, can the people and sites help us learn about a central phenomenon? Okay, so this is your object of research. How many people and sites should we study? So I would advise you to keep your sample size small. Keep it small and keep it manageable. Don't try to do too much, not for your Lean project. Do you have access is another question. If you don't have access to a particular situation or a group of people, then there's no way that you can do the research. So for example, if you're interested in leadership, but you don't have access, or the leaders are not really very willing to tell you or give you information because that impacts them, and this is a true example, then you may have to drop it and think of something else. Do you have permissions? So obtaining permission is very, very central, and that is why we do have an ethics committee that you will have to go through and get past before you go out and do your field research. In terms of data analysis, the ones that we will definitely be using would be coding and content analysis. And so from all the data, how do you code, how do you categorize, and then how do you analyze the contents? So there are other ways of analysis which I just wanted to put down there so that I discharge my responsibility of telling you what are the ways. But I'm just advising that most of the time we will be using coding and content analysis. And so let's move on to the final one, which is writing up and presenting your findings, which it is not an easy task. So you have so much information, right? So what are you going to do? I think the first thing you need to realize is you ask yourself the question, are you writing a thesis, a book chapter, a conference paper, or a journal article? And here you're writing a DMin dissertation is a thesis. So it is not a book, it is not a manual. Okay, so remember that. And a dissertation will have its own format and its own requirements. So stick to that. The process of writing up is just as important as doing the research itself. So finally, let me leave this with you. Don't panic. Research is a journey. This is only the start. We can only do our best. And on our side, we will do all our best to help you reach the finish line. Thank you very much.